Enoch by Robert Bloch. Read for you by Thoughtful Devil. It always starts the same way. First, there's the feeling. Have you ever felt the tread of little feet walking across the top of your skull? Footsteps on your skull, back and forth, back and forth. It starts like that. You can't see he who does the walking. After all, it's on top of your head. If you're clever, you wait for a chance and suddenly brush a hand through your hair. But you can't catch him that way. He knows. Even if you clamp both hands flat to your head, he somehow manages to wriggle through. Maybe he jumps. Terribly swift he is. And you can't ignore him. If you don't pay any attention to his footsteps, he tries the next step. He wriggles down the back of your neck and whispers into your ear. You can feel his body, so tiny and cold, pressed tightly against the base of your brain. There must be something numbing in his claws, because they don't hurt. Although later, you'll find little scratches on your neck that bleed and bleed. But at the time, all you know is that something tiny and cold is pressing there. Pressing and whispering. That's when you try to fight him. You try not to hear what he says, because when you listen, you're lost. You'll have to obey him. Then, oh, he's so wicked and wise. He knows how to frighten and threaten if you resist. But I seldom try anymore. It's better for me if I do listen and then obey. As long as I'm willing to listen, things don't seem so bad, because he can be soothing and persuasive too, tempting. The things he has promised me in that little silken whisper. He keeps his promises too. Folks think I'm poor because I never have any money and live in that old shack on the edge of town. But he has given me riches. After I do what he wants, he takes me away, out of myself, for days. There are other places besides this world, you know. Places where I am king. People laugh at me and say I have no friends. The girls in town used to call me Scarecrow. Yet sometimes, after I've done his bidding, he brings the riches of the world to me. Dreams? I don't think so. It's the other life that's just a dream, the life in the shack at the edge of town. That part doesn't feel real anymore. Not even the deaths. Yes, I kill certain people. That's what Enoch wants, you know. That's what he whispers about. He asks me to kill certain people he dislikes. I don't like that. I used to fight against it. I told you that before, didn't I? But I can't anymore. He wants me to kill people for him. Enoch, the thing that lives at the top of my scalp. I can't see him. I can't catch him. I can only feel him and hear him and obey. Sometimes he'll leave me alone for days. Then, suddenly, I'll feel him there, scratching away at the roof of my scalp. I'll hear his whisper ever so plainly, and he'll be telling me about someone who is coming through the swamp or the field. I don't know how he knows about them. He couldn't have seen them, yet he describes them perfectly.
There's a tramp walking down the Ellsworthy Road. A short, fat man. Bald. That'll make it easier. His name is Mike. He's wearing a brown sweater with blue overalls. He's going to turn into the swamp in about 10 minutes when the sun goes down. He'll stop under the big tree next to the dump. Hide behind that tree. Wait until he starts to look for fire. firewood. And then you know what to do. Go. Get the hatchet. Hurry.
Sometimes I ask Enoch what he will give me. Usually I just trust him. I know I'm going to have to do it anyway, so I might as well go ahead at once. Enoch is never wrong about things, and he keeps me out of trouble. That is, he always did. Until last time. One night, I was sitting in the shack eating supper when he told me about this girl.
She's coming to visit you. A beautiful girl, all in black. She has a wonderful quality to her head. Such fine bones, fine. She will come in the door and ask you to help her with the car. She took a side road, planning to go into town. Now the car's in the swamp. One of the tires needs changing. You'll go out to help her when she asks you. Don't take anything. She has a wrench in the car. Use that.
At first, I thought he was telling me about one of my rewards. But Enoch was talking about a real person. It sounded funny hearing Enoch talk about things like automobile tires, but he knows about them. Enoch knows everything. This time, I tried to fight him. I kept saying, I won't do it, I won't do it, I won't do it. And then he reminded me that it was better for me to do it to her than for him to do it to me.
After all, I can't help it. I must be served every so often to keep me alive, to keep me strong, so I can serve you, so I can give you things. That's why you have to obey me. If not, I'll just stay right here, right next to you. Always.
So I did it. She knocked on my door just a few minutes later, and it was just as Enoch had whispered it. She was a pretty girl with blonde hair. I like blonde hair. I was glad when we went out into the swamp that I didn't have to harm her hair. I got her behind the neck with the wrench. Enoch told me what to do. After I used the hatchet, I put the body in the quicksand. Enoch was with me, and he cautioned me about heel marks. I got rid of them. I was worried about the car, but he showed me how to use the end of a rotten log and pitch it over. I wasn't sure it would sink, too, but it did. And much faster than I would have believed. It was a relief to see the car go. I threw the wrench in after it. Then Enoch told me to go home, and I did. And at once I felt that dreamy feeling stealing me away. Enoch had promised me something extra special for this one, and I sank down into sleep right away. I could barely feel the pressure leave my head as Enoch abandoned me, scampering off back into the swamp for his reward. I don't know how long I slept. It must have been a long time. All I remember is that when I finally started to wake up, knowing somehow that Enoch was back with me again, I felt something was wrong. Then I woke up all the way because I heard the banging on my door. I waited a moment. I waited for Enoch to whisper to me, to tell me what to do. But Enoch was asleep now. He always sleeps afterwards. Nothing wakes him for days on end, and during that time, I am free. Usually I enjoy such freedom, but not now. The pounding on my door grew louder, and I couldn't wait any longer. I got up and answered. Old Sheriff Shelby came through the doorway. "Come on, Seth," he said. "I'm taking you up to the jail." I didn't say anything. His beady black eyes were peeping everywhere inside my shack. When he looked at me, I wanted to hide. I felt so scared. He couldn't see Enoch, of course. Nobody can. But Enoch was there. I felt him resting very lightly on top of my skull, burrowed down under a blanket of hair, clinging to my greasy curls and sleeping as peacefully as an infant. Emily Robbins' folks said she was planning on cutting through the swamp. We followed the tire tracks up to the old quicksand. Enoch had forgotten about the tracks. So what could I say? "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," said Sheriff Shelby. "Come on, Seth." I went with him. There was nothing else for me to do. I went with him into town, and all the loafers were out trying to rush the car. There were women in the crowd, too. They kept yelling for the men to get me. But Sheriff Shelby held them off, and at last I was tucked away safe and sound in the back of the jailhouse. He locked me up in the middle cell. The 2 cells on each side of mine were vacant, so I was all alone. All alone, except for Enoch, and he slept through everything. It was still pretty early in the morning, and Sheriff Shelby went out again with some other men. I guess he was going to try and get the body out of the quicksand, if he could. He didn't try to ask any questions, and I wondered about that. Charlie Potter now, he was different. He wanted to know everything. Sheriff Shelby had left him in charge of the jail while he was away. He brought me my breakfast after a while, and hung around asking questions. I just kept still. I knew better than to talk to a fool like Charlie Potter. He thought I was crazy, just like the mob outside. Most people in that town thought I was crazy, because of my mother, I suppose, and because of the way I lived all alone out in the swamp. What could I say to Charlie Potter? If I told him about Enoch, he'd never believe me anyways. So I didn't talk. I listened. Then Charlie Potter told me about the search for Emily Robbins, and about how Sheriff Shelby got to wondering over some other disappearances a while back. He said that there would be a big trial, and that the district attorney was coming down from the county seat. And he'd heard they were sending out a doctor to see me right away. Sure enough, just as I finished breakfast, the doctor came. Charlie Potter saw him drive up and let him in. He had to work fast to keep some of the oafs from breaking in with him. They wanted to lynch me, I suppose, but the doctor came in all right. A little man with one of those funny beards on his chin, and he made Charlie Potter go up front to the office while he sat down outside the cell and talked with me. His name was Dr. Silversmith. Now up to this time, I wasn't really feeling anything. It had all happened so fast that I didn't get a chance to think. It was like part of a dream. The sheriff and the mob and all this talk about a trial and a lynching and the body in the swamp. But somehow the sight of this Dr. Silversmith changed things. He was real, all right. You could tell he was a doctor by the quiet way he talked. He sounded like a doctor who wanted to send me to the institution after they found my mother. That was one of the first things Dr. Silversmith asked me about. What had happened to my mother? He seemed to know quite a lot about me, and that made it easy for me to talk. Pretty soon I found myself telling him all sorts of things. How my mother and I lived in the shack, how she made the filters and potions, and sold them, about the big pot and the way we gathered herbs at night, about the nights when she went off alone, shouting and yelling and naked, and I would hear the strange noises from far away. I didn't want to say much more, but he knew anyway. He knew they had called her a witch. He even knew how she died, when Santo Dinarelli came to our door that evening and stabbed her because she had made the potion for his daughter, who ran away with that trapper. He knew about me living in the swamp all alone after that, too. Enoch, up on top of that head of mine, still sleeping, not knowing or caring about what was happening. Somehow I was talking to Dr. Silversmith about Enoch. I wanted to explain that I wasn't really the one who killed this girl, so I had to mention Enoch and how my mother had made that bargain in the woods one night. She hadn't let me come with her. I was only 10, but she took some of my blood, pricking me with a needle and dropping it into a little bottle. I don't know exactly what she did, but when she came back in the morning, Enoch was with her. I couldn't see him at the time, of course, but she told me all about him, and I could feel him when he perched like a vulture on top of my head. He was to be mine forever, she said, to look after me and help me in all ways. I told this very carefully, and explained why it was I had to obey Enoch, ever since my innocent mother was killed. Enoch protected me just as Mother had planned, because she knew I couldn't get along alone. I admitted this to Dr. Silversmith because I thought he was a wise man and would understand me. That was wrong. I knew it at once, because while Dr. Silversmith leaned forward and stroked his little beard and said yes, yes, yes over and over again, I could feel his eyes watching me. He had the same eyes as Sheriff Shelby. Small eyes, cruel eyes, eyes that don't trust when they see you. Prying, peering eyes. Then he began to ask me all sorts of funny questions. You'd think he'd ask me about Enoch, since he was the explanation of everything. But instead, Dr. Silversmith asked me if I ever heard any other voices, if I ever saw things that I knew weren't there. He asked me how I felt when I killed Emily Robbins, and whether I won't repeat that question. He talked to me like I was some kind of crazy person. I just laughed and shut up tighter than a clam. After a while, he gave up and went away, shaking his head. I laughed after him because I knew he hadn't found out what he wanted to find. He wanted to know all my mother's secrets, and my secrets, and Enoch's secrets too. But he didn't, and I laughed, and then I went to sleep. I slept almost all afternoon, you know. When I woke up, there was a new man standing in front of my cell. He was a big, fat, smiling man with kind eyes. "Hello, Seth," he said, very friendly. "Having a little snooze?" I reached up to the top of my head. I couldn't feel Enoch, so I knew he was there and still asleep. He moves very fast even when he's sleeping. "Don't be alarmed," said the man. "I won't hurt you." "Did that doctor send you?" I asked. The man laughed. "Of course not," he told me. "My name's Cassidy, Edwin Cassidy. I'm the district attorney, and I'm in charge here. Can I come in and sit down? I'm locked in." "I've got the keys from the sheriff," said Mr. Cassidy. He took them out and opened my cell, walked right in and sat down right next to me, on the bench. "Aren't you afraid?" I asked him. "You know I'm supposed to be a murderer." "Why, Seth," Mr. Cassidy laughed, "I'm not afraid of you. I know you didn't mean to kill anyone." He put his hand on my shoulder, and I didn't draw away. It was a nice, fat, soft hand. He had a big diamond ring on his finger that just twinkled away in the sunshine. "How's Enoch?" he said. I jumped. "Oh, that's all right. That fool doctor told me when I met him down on the street. He doesn't understand about Enoch, does he, Seth? But we do. That doctor thinks I'm crazy." "Well, just between us, Seth, it didn't sound a little hard to believe. I've just come from the swamp. Sheriff Shelby and some of his men are still working down there, digging and stuff. They found Emily Robbins' body just a little while ago, and, some other bodies. A fat man's body, a small boy, and some Indian. The quicksand preserves them, I watched his eyes, and they were still smiling, so I knew I could trust this man. They'll find the other bodies too if they keep on, won't they, Seth?" I nodded. "But I didn't wait any longer. I saw enough to understand that you were telling the truth. Enoch must have made you do all these things, didn't he?" I nodded again. "Fine," said Mr. Cassidy, pressing my shoulder. "You see, we do understand each other now, so I won't blame you for anything you tell me." "What do you want to know?" I asked. "Oh, lots of things. I'm interested in Enoch, you see. Just how many people did he ask you to hurt? Altogether, that is." 9, I said. "And they're all buried in the quicksand?" "Yes." "Do you know their names?" "Only a few." I told him the names of the ones I knew. "Sometimes Enoch just describes them for me, and I go out to meet them," I explained. Mr. Cassidy just sort of chuckled and took out a cigar. I frowned. "Don't want me to smoke, eh?" "Please, I don't like it. Mother didn't believe in smoking. She never let me." Mr. Cassidy laughed out loud now, but he put the cigar away and leaned forward. "You can be a big help to me, Seth," he whispered. "I suppose you know what a district attorney must do, right?" "He's sort of a lawyer, isn't he? At trials and things." "That's right. I'm going to be at your trial, Seth. Now, you don't want to have to get up in front of all those people and tell them about what happened, right?" "No, Mr. Cassidy. Not those mean people here in town. They hate me." "Then here's what you do. You tell me all about it, and I'll talk for you. That's friendly enough, isn't it?" I wished Enoch was there to help me, but he was asleep. I looked at Mr. Cassidy and made up my own mind. "Yes," I said. "I can tell you." So I told him everything I knew. After a while he stopped laughing, but he was just getting so interested he couldn't bother to laugh or do anything but listen. "One thing more," he said. "We found some bodies in the swamp. Emily Robbins' body we could identify, and a few of the others. But it would be easier if we knew something else. You can tell me this, Seth. You can trust me. Where are the heads?" I stood up and turned away. "I can't tell you that," I said, "because I don't know." "Don't know?" "Enoch takes them," I explained. "Don't you understand? That's why I must kill people for him. Because he needs their heads." Mr. Cassidy looked puzzled. "He always makes me sever the heads and leave them," I went on. "I put the bodies in the quicksand, then go home. He puts me to sleep and rewards me. After that he goes away, back to the heads. That's what he wants." "Why does he want them, Seth?" I told him. "You see, it wouldn't do you any good if you could find them, because you probably wouldn't recognize anything anyway." Mr. Cassidy sat up and sighed. But why do you let Enoch do these things?
I must, or else he'd do it to me. That's what he always threatens. He has to have it. So I obey him.
Mr. Cassidy watched me while I walked the floor, but he didn't say a word. He seemed to be very nervous all of a sudden, and when I came close, he sort of leaned away.
You'll have to explain all this at the trial, I said. About Enoch and everything.
He shook his head. I'm not going to tell about Enoch at the trial, and neither are you, Mr. Cassidy said. Nobody is even going to know that Enoch exists.
Why?
I'm trying to help you, Seth. Don't you know what the people will say if you mention Enoch to them? They'll say you're crazy, and you don't want that to happen.
No, but what can you do? How can you help me? Mr. Cassidy smiled at me.
You're afraid of Enoch, aren't you? Well, I was just thinking out loud. Suppose you gave Enoch to me. Right now. Let me take care of him for you during the trial. Then he wouldn't be yours and you wouldn't have to say anything about him. He probably doesn't want people to know what he does anyway.
That's right, I said. Enoch would be very angry. He's a secret, you know. But I hate to give him to you without asking. And he's asleep now.
Asleep?
Yes, on top of my skull. Only you can't see him, of course.
Mr. Cassidy gazed at my head, and then he chuckled again. Oh, I can explain everything when he wakes up, he told me. When he knows it's all for the best, I'm sure he'll be happy.
Well, I guess it's all right then, I sighed.
But you must promise
to take very good care of him.
Of course, said Mr. Cassidy.
And you'll give him what he wants, what he needs.
Of course.
And you won't tell a soul.
Not a soul.
Of course, you know what will happen to you if you refuse to give Enoch what he wants.
I warned Mr. Cassidy.
He will take it from you by force.
Don't you worry, Seth.
I stood still for a minute, because all at once I could feel something move. Enoch was waking up. He's awake, I whispered. Now I can tell him. Yes, Enoch was awake. I could feel him crawling all over my scalp, moving towards my ear. Enoch, I whispered. Can you hear me? He heard.
Then I explained everything to him, how I was giving him to Mr. Cassidy.
Enoch didn't say a word.
Mr. Cassidy didn't say a word.
He just sat there and grinned.
I suppose it must have looked a little strange to see me talking to nothing.
Go to Mr. Cassidy, I whispered. Go to him.
And Enoch went. I felt the weight lift from my head. That was all, but I knew he was gone.
Can you feel him, Mr. Cassidy? I asked.
What? Oh, sure, he said, and stood up.
Take good care of Enoch, I told him.
The best.
Don't put your hat on, I warned. Enoch doesn't like hats.
Sorry, I forgot. Well, Seth, I'll say goodbye now. You've been a mighty great help to me. And from now on, we can just forget about Enoch, as far as telling anyone else is concerned. I'll come back and talk about the trial. That Dr. Silversmith, he's gonna try and tell the folks you're crazy. Maybe it would be best if you just denied everything you told him. Now that I have Enoch.
That sounded like a fine idea. But then again, I knew Mr. Cassidy was a smart man. Whatever you say, Mr. Cassidy, just be good to Enoch, and he'll be good to you.
Mr. Cassidy shook my hand,
and then he and Enoch went away.
I felt tired again. Maybe it was the strain, maybe it was just that I felt a little off, knowing that Enoch was gone. Anyways, I went back to sleep for a long time. It was nighttime when I woke up. Old Charlie Potter was banging on the cell door, bringing me my supper. He jumped when I said hello to him, and backed away. Murderer. They got 9 bodies out in the swamp. You psychotic monster. Why, Charlie, I said. I always thought you were a friend of mine. Psycho. I'm gonna get out of here right now, leave you locked up for the night. Sheriff will see that nobody breaks in to lynch you, but if you ask me, he's wasting his time. Then Charlie turned out all the lights and went away. I heard him go out the front door and put the padlock on, and I was all alone in the jailhouse. All alone. It was strange to be all alone for the first time in years. All alone, without Enoch. I ran my fingers across the top of my head. It felt bare and strange. The moon was shining through the window, and I stood there looking out at the empty street. Enoch always loved the moon. It made him lively, made him restless and hungry. I wondered how he felt now with Mr. Cassidy. I must have stood there for a long time. My legs were numb when I turned around and listened to the fumbling at the door. The lock clicked open, and then Mr. Cassidy came in. He was all out of breath, and he was clawing at his head. "Take him off me! Take him away!" "What's the matter?" I asked. "Enoch, this thing of yours. I thought you were crazy. Maybe I'm crazy, but take him off." "Mr. Cassidy, I told you what Enoch was like. He's crawling around up there. I can feel him. I can hear him. The things he says." I explained all that, Mr. Cassidy. Does Enoch want something? You know what it is, and you have to give it to him. You promised. I can't. He can't make me. Oh, he can. And he will. Mr. Cassidy gripped the bars on the cell door. "Seth, you have to help me. Call Enoch. Take him back. Make him go back to you." "All right, Mr. Cassidy." I called Enoch. He didn't answer. I called again. Silence. "It's no use," I said. "He won't come back. He likes you." Mr. Cassidy started to cry. It shocked me, and then I just felt kind of sorry for him. He just didn't understand. I know what Enoch can do to you when he whispers that way. First he coaxes you, and then he pleads. Then he threatens. "You'd better do what he wants," I told Mr. Cassidy. "Has he told you who to take? Who to kill?" Mr. Cassidy didn't pay any attention to me. He just cried. And then he took out the jail keys and opened up the cell door next to mine. He went in and locked the door. "I won't," he sobbed. I won't. "You won't what?" "I won't hurt Dr. Silversmith. I won't let Enoch hurt him. I'll stay right here in the cell, and I'm safe here. I know it." He slumped down sideways, and I could see him through the bars dividing our cells, sitting all hunched over while his hands tore at his hair. "You'd better," I warned, "or else Enoch will do something to you. Please, Mr. Cassidy. It's for your own good." Then Mr. Cassidy gave a little moan, and I guess he fainted because he didn't say anything more, and he stopped clawing. I called to him once, but he wouldn't answer. So what could I do? I sat down in the corner of my cell and watched the moonlight. Moonlight always makes Enoch wild. Then Mr. Cassidy started to scream. Not loud, but deep down in his throat. He didn't move at all, just screamed. I knew it was Enoch, taking what he wanted from him. What was the use of looking? You can't stop him, and I had warned Mr. Cassidy. I just sat there and held my hands to my ears until it was all over. When I turned around again, Mr. Cassidy still sat slumped against the bars. There wasn't a sound to be heard. Oh yes, there was. A purring. A soft, faraway purring. The purring of Enoch after he is fed. And then I heard a scratching. The scratching of Enoch's claws when he frisks because he's been fed. The purring and the scratching came from inside Mr. Cassidy's skull. That would be Enoch, all right. And he was happy now. I was happy, too. I reached my hand through the bars and pulled the jail keys from Mr. Cassidy's pocket. I opened my cell door, and I was free again. There was no need for me to stay now, with Mr. Cassidy gone. And Enoch wouldn't be staying either. I called to him. That was as close as I've ever come to really seeing Enoch. A sort of white streak that came flashing out of the big red hole he had eaten in the back of Mr. Cassidy's skull. And then I felt the soft, cold, flabby weight landing on my own head once more. And I knew Enoch had come home. I walked through the corridor and opened the outer door of the jail. Enoch's tiny feet began to patter on the roof of my brain. Together we walked out into the night. The moon was shining. Everything was still. And I could hear, ever so softly, Enoch's happy laughter in my ear. Robert Bloch was an American fiction writer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He wrote widely in crime, horror, fantasy, and science fiction genres, and is best known as the writer of Psycho. However, Robert Bloch also wrote over 100 short stories and over 30 novels. He was a close personal friend of H.P. Lovecraft and, more pertinently to me, Stanley Weinbaum. In my opinion, one of the most criminally underrated science fiction writers who ever lived. The inimitable art of Stanley Weinbaum and H.P. Lovecraft, as well as their many friends and associates and their relationships to each other, will be coming to this channel in the very near future. Bloch was known for being very witty and very jovial. His short story collections are titled things such as Tales in a Jugular Vein, such stuff as Screams Are Made Of, and From the Mouths of Graves. If you like Bloch's fiction, anthologies of his work are available, as well as his own introductions to the works of Lovecraft, Weinbaum, and his other associates. Stay thoughtful, my moonbats. And remember, every day can be Halloween, so long as you think spooky thoughts. Thoughtful Devil, out. Enoch had promised me something extra special for this one.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere.
Hi, Morgan. How are you?
waiting. Hi. How are you? Am I interrupting something?
Oh, yeah, I was doing the story.
Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Okay,
No,
I'll
it's
stop.
okay.
I'll stop.
No. I'll pause it for now. Such a beautiful voice you have. Sorry.
you.
Love you too.
Oh my god.